Yeah, I'm recording already. Oops. Keep doing that. So Italy in World War II, they wanted a lot more than they got. They wanted more here and more on the Dalmatian coast. They did not get it because of their poor performance in World War I, but they still thought they deserved it. And Benito Mussolini wanted to change that with fascism. It was authoritarian or a dictatorship, and it also thought that it was nationalistic, or in other words, their nation was the best, which both things Italy kind of liked. And Adolf Hitler, also thought the same for Germany and the German people, but he did it wrong and decided that he needed to murder everyone to be able to do it and achieve Lebensraum, which is German for living space, but they really weren't gonna win World War II, to be honest. It looked like they were going to, but even if they captured... I'm ranting on about stuff I'm gonna rant on about later. I should really get back on track. But Germany lost territories in Versailles, like Alsace-Lorraine, Schleswig-Holstein, the Polish corridor, and a huge ally known as Austria-Hungary, which looks nothing like this. I'm just trying to draw something that looks kind of like what they looked like, even though that's not really what they looked like. But you get the idea of how big they were and multi-diverse they were. I mean, Czechoslovakia isn't even one nationality. They're like the Germans in the Sudetenland, the Czechs, the Slovaks, and then the Ukrainians, which Ukraine. But that is for later in the video. I cannot keep myself on track. My golly goodness. Oh my gosh. They wanted all of that land, but the French and the British did not want that, nor did the Italians. So the Italians also wanted influence in Austria, so they formed the Stresa Front between Italy, France, and the United Kingdom. But what broke that was when Italy decided that they were going to invade the African nation of Ethiopia to make their African empire bigger. They ended up struggling in Ethiopia. They did not do very well. They ended up winning, but they ended up breaking their ties with the Allies, and the Stresa Front was gone. And Germany, so they allied themselves with Germany, and Germany was doing many things with appeasement. They told that the Allies said their tanks were tractors, so they could make more and rearm. They Anschlussed Austria. They killed a bunch of people in the Sudetenland, which was a mostly German area anyway, that was put into French protection after World War I, but was going to vote to join Germany again. But later, they ended up killing people to make sure that the Sudetenland was going to vote to join Germany, even though it was a mostly German region. So, it just didn't make any sense, and they did the same in Austria, which just proves why that the Nazis really weren't very good. But the Allies did nothing when they took Austria or the Sudetenland or invaded Poland. They literally did something called the Phony War, where they declared war on them when they invaded Poland, but they didn't actually attack them. All because that they were licking their wounds from the First World War, and they just wanted to rearm and not fight, but it really just hurt them in the long run, when they could have just knocked out the Nazis when they were still weak and trying to rearm. But no. Yeah, they were kind of dumb in doing that. But back to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, an alliance between the Soviet Union and the German Reich. Well, the Third Reich. Anyway. The Germans did not want to be in a two-front war between the Allies and the Soviets, so they signed an agreement with the Soviets, giving them influence in Bessarabia, Finland, the Baltics, and eastern Poland. And the Soviets also signed the agreement, even though that the Germans were anti-communist, the Soviets were communist, and the Soviets didn't like the Nazis, but they wanted the Nazis and the Allies to destroy themselves, and then the Soviets would just take the rest, take the weakened powers of Europe. So, to do this plan, the Soviets actually gave the Germans oil. The Germans accepted this oil, and the British wanted to do Operation Unthinkable, but they never did, and it was an operation to kill Soviet oil. But now that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, before the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, I've jumped myself up again. You know how I said the Sudetenland was given to the Germans? It was in the Munich Conference, which happened there, where the Allies pretty much said, well, the Soviets can't go through Poland or Romania to get troops to you, and we are still rebuilding after the First World War, so we're not going to help you. So the Germans not only took the Sudetenland, which had all of the Czechoslovakian forts, they took Czechia, puppeted Slovakia, and gave Carpathian Ruthenia to Hungary in the First Vienna Award, and then Northern Transylvania in the Second. Romania then joined the Axis because they wanted Bessarabia back from the Soviets. Romania joined soon after the invasion of Poland, which I'm now going to explain to you. They invaded Poland. The Allies did nothing. Soviets then invaded Poland. The Allies still did nothing. And then the Germans knew that the French had set up the Maginot Line, which is strong defenses here. And then they put their best troops on the Franco-Belgian border to run into Belgium, so when the Germans got rerouted through Belgium, they could fight in Belgium and not in France. But that didn't work because they thought the Ardennes, which was here in southern Belgium, was going to be a natural defense. But it wasn't, because the Germans drove their tanks through and drove north to Dunkirk to encircle the Allies at Dunkirk. And my golly goodness, I forgot about the invasion of Denmark and Norway. They invaded Norway. The British tried to put troops, but Germany had already occupied the main parts of Norway. And this was right before the invasion of France, while the French and British were still doing nothing. But now back to the encirclement at Dunkirk. The best Allied troops were encircled at Dunkirk. The Germans pushed them back out, but not enough to actually kill them. So they went on to fight another day. France capitulated after the capture of Paris and the Germans formed Vichy France. The French didn't want to have the Germans ransack all their country, so they surrendered. And the Germans wanted to create Vichy France with a little bit of autonomy to make the British think that the French betrayed them. It didn't really end up having the desired effect, though. But now, my gosh, I keep forgetting about information. Whatever. I hope you can bear with me, because we're going back to right before the war, when the Italians pretty much killed themselves in Spain to make Francisco Franco be an ally in Spain with a fascist Spain. And now, we are going to go to this, which is another map. This is in 1940. Yes, it's in 1940, when Germany has Vichy France, has pretty much captured all of here. They also invaded the Netherlands when they went through Belgium. And now the Battle of Britain is happening. It's important to say that the Italians killed themselves in the Spanish Civil War because they pretty much gave up an arm and a limb for it. It was pretty much useless. But now back to what's actually happening right now, as I'm trying to thoroughly explain what's happening. So Soviets, this map, Finland up here. See Leningrad here. The Finnish border was close to Leningrad. The Soviets wanted to push it back from Leningrad, but the Finnish didn't want to, so the Soviets launched the Winter War and attacked Finland. The Mannerheim Line, which is right up here, north of the Soviet, like right at the Soviet-Finnish border, and it was short because it was next to a lake, and it was between this sea and a lake, so it wasn't very long. The Mannerheim Line killed so many Soviets that the Finnish had to rotate their gunners because the Soviets were dying so much. But the Soviets did end up making Finland peace out, but the Finnish got their revenge by joining Operation Barbarossa, but that's a little bit later. So for right now, the Germans made a plan to invade Switzerland, but since Switzerland was doing so good at defending themselves from literally everyone because they're trying to have armed neutrality, the Germans just didn't do the operation. Another German operation that they didn't do was Operation Sea Lion, which was a planned naval invasion of Great Britain. But during the Battle of Britain, the Germans never ended up getting enough air superiority over Britain or naval supremacy in the English Channel to actually do the operation. So they failed. Failed to do that. The British ended up protecting themselves very well because of the Spitfire, which was an amazing plane that they used in the war. Now, Italy wants to invade Greece. They're going to fail in Greece and get pushed back, so then the Germans have to invade Yugoslavia and get Bulgaria on their side because Bulgaria wanted North Macedonia from a long time ago. This ends up happening with little resistance, but it does draw German attention, which delays Operation Barbarossa by a little bit, which was probably enough to save the Soviets a little. But Operation Barbarossa, there was one German push to Leningrad, one in the center to Moscow, and one here to Stalingrad, which is like over there. Probably not enough to fit on the map, though. They blitzed the Soviets, who Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, had just purged like everyone in the army because he got paranoid about someone who wasn't even living in the Soviet Union. Lev Trotsky. But in other words, he just killed everyone to make sure that no one could assume power instead of take his position of power away from him. And he thought he was going to be safe because he thought that the Germans would finish up in Britain before ever attacking the Soviets. But the Germans were fools and attacked the Soviets. The Soviets got pushed back far, ending up getting encircled at Leningrad. And then there was that. The Germans get stalled in the winter, like a couple times. They failed to capture Moscow. And then they decide that they'll just go to Stalingrad. The Soviets end up taking Stalingrad, but because Blitzkrieg has the tanks pushing so fast and then the infantry trying to catch up, their flanks get surrounded easily. So the Soviets just pushed around their flanks and they got flanked at Stalingrad, encircling the German Sixth Army. Then the Battle of Kursk happened. Kursk, and somewhere around this time, Siege of Leningrad, the Germans failed at Leningrad. The Germans wanted to, because there was, no, Battle of Kursk was more like Kursk. Germans wanted to encircle it, but the Soviets ended up protecting it so well that when they were able to do a counterattack in the center, the Germans pretty much just got pushed. Yeah, it was like their lines were kind of, yeah. And around this time, at the Battle of Kursk, the Tehran Conference happens, where the Allies are like, we don't want the Soviets taking control of all of Europe. We have to invade them. So, after they win in the campaign for North Africa, after liberating French North Africa in Operation Torch, and kicking Rommel out of North Africa, he was a German panzer general. Rommel was then reassigned to the Atlantic Wall. And then the Allies' naval invade Sicily. At first they went up through Sicily so slowly that the Germans thought that they would be like here by 1948. But then Italy just collapsed into partisans. And also Italy, they made a cartoon about it. But the Italians collapsed. Germany had to invade, have another front, and all that who jazz. I don't know why I said who jazz. But that was, they had to, because the partisans captured Benito Mussolini and switched sides in the war. But then the Germans freed Benito Mussolini, and they led a regime in the north, but it really didn't do anything. And the Greeks, the Allies, ended up doing something in Greece. I know that. But mainly the Allies invaded Normandy. They counterintelligenced the Germans so hard that the Germans thought that the invasion of Normandy was just a distraction from the main invasion that was going to happen in Calais, which is there, which is the shortest distance between the Great Isle of Great Britain and the continent of Europe. It was not the main invasion. They pushed, probably by now, like, connecting the fronts, but I'm not sure if they connected the fronts or not, so I'm just going to leave it unconnected. This point, the Soviets are pushing quite hard. Then they push into Romania. Romania is like, we don't want to get killed by the Soviets, let's switch sides. So they switch sides. Hungary tries to switch sides, but then Germany invades make sure that they don't. So now the Soviets looking more like here, probably now pushing there. And another part of the war, a lot of Soviets that got taken prisoner by the Germans ended up fighting for the Germans. Some of them tried to rejoin the Soviets and surrender to them, but the Soviets just killed them. But now, yeah, Italy is definitely pushed out by now, I'm pretty sure. But now, the lines are looking more like the Battle of Berlin has already happened. The lines are looking more like that for Germany. Germany, it's like, well, what if we do the push through the Ardennes again? They fail. It's called the Battle of the Bulge because the Germans created a bulge in the front line. And they managed to encircle some American troops, but they never ended up crushing the encirclement. They got pushed back. Pretty much almost the last of the German equipment is destroyed. And the Germans ended up capitulating. But even at this desperate point for the Germans, they were like, what if we hide in the Alps? It didn't work. So, yeah, they ended up surrendering. The Alta Conference had already been held, so if anything really happens, it's after the Alta Conference, nothing much will change in the way that the borders of Europe were divvied up. So, but, alright, that's the end of the video.